have your witnesses attest that that is truth. We're still somewhat under a Zoom. They haven't relaxed all of it. We've been trying to keep this to about an hour because people are close. So let's try to do that. I'll read into the record. This is case Z21023. It's a conditional use petition to allow a change of use from group home to group quarters to increase occupancy from 8 to 12. It's located at 27 West 121 80th Street, Naperville. It is what? Let's see, 2.4 acres. It's on well and septic. It was published in the Daily Herald on April 28th, and it's the public hearing tonight of May 13th. It appears that, reading these, building, DuPage, health, stormwater, and public works have no comment or it's no jurisdiction. The external Naperville City, Township, Highway, Fire Department, School District have no comments, and Forest Preserve says no comment. Having said that, I will turn it over to council. Why don't you begin your presentation?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the ZBA, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be before you. My name is Mark Gershon with the firm of Polsinelli. With my colleague Megan Gordon, we are here representing Montanito and look forward to presenting this. Mr. Chair, I want to check on one piece. The only witness I did intend to have testify was Andrew Lyons, who will be testifying as to no adverse impact on surrounding properties. I can summarize that if you want to, although I have threatened him if he talks for more than 2 minutes. So,
It's your choice. We'll just keep it moving.
2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to swear them in?
If you would.
Yes, please. Anybody that's going to testify should be sworn.
And that would include those of you who I'm going to ask for proof, so it's pretty much all of you.
You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give at this cause and out hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
I do.
I do. Thank you. Again, my thanks to everyone in attendance, to the staff. We know in particular under COVID, these are difficult times for all of us to do our civic duty, and we really appreciate all of your coming out here tonight. Quick overview, as you saw with me this evening, although they won't be testifying up front with the exception of Andrew Lyons, is Jennifer Gallagher, who's the Chief Development Officer with Montanito, Dave Rezendes, who is the Vice President of Facilities, Javier Milan, who you know with KLOA, our traffic engineer, and Andrew and Megan, who I've previously mentioned. Just some quick background on Montanito, and I'll go back through everything we've submitted to you at the end of this. Montanito has 25 years of experience in the eating disorder treatment field, and multiple locations. They're accredited by the Joint Commission. I should say, since I'm not used to not having this up on a screen, in your packet is a copy of our PowerPoint, should you wish to walk through it. If not, I will certainly be hitting all the key points from it. Just to give you some quick background on who our experts who are with us are today, you have copies of all their bios. Cohen Resnick, founded in 1919, a team of over 3,000 people. Andrew Lyons is a principal and designated member of the Appraisal Institute. KLOA, the firm has over 150 years of professional experience as transportation engineers and planners. Javier has over 25 years of experience. A sense of the project. This is a project that already exists. This house was built, has been in operation since last June, and as you'll hear later, it's a very successful operation. We're not here before you to ask for your approval of the current use that already exists. It exists with 8 beds. All of the improvements to the house, internally, and all of the improvements externally, which I'll go over, have already been completed on this property. And we're simply petitioning you for permission to utilize the entire home as designated. As you'll hear, there's always been a significant need for a home which addresses for adolescent girls eating disorder issues. That need has become even greater in COVID. One of the true unfortunate impacts of it is that those with this type of need for help need it even more so now. I'm going to skip over a few things that you already mentioned, where our property is located. But again, just to go and to go through our standards, which we will talk about throughout the presentation. As a reminder, you have our application, which includes our written response to each of the standards, as well as the information you'll hear today with respect to all those standards. What I'd like to do now is to first ask that our experts be accepted by the ZBA for their testimony in the record.
Well, I find it hard to accept them before we even know what their testimony is.
Oh, not accept the testimony, accept them as, the ZBA typically has accepted as, has had
That they're qualified to testify.
qualified testimony.
Okay.
You've got their resumes, et cetera.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to formally do that or just confirm it.
We acknowledge that they're qualified to testify in the area you're going to call them on.
Want to enter into evidence on the record, and I'm going to need that yellow piece of paper you had with the additional items on. The following documents, you have our application, which include, as I said, includes our specific written responses to each of the applicable standards for all requested relief, which will be supplemented tonight. All of our exhibits, studies, and documentation previously supplied to the county. The PowerPoint presentation you have in front of you, you've already taken a notice of the notice, which was done by the county, the testimony, the resumes, and the curriculum vitae, and also the additional documents that were passed out to you today, our topographic survey, our site plan, landscape plan. This is the full-size versions that you request from us. You've had both of those previously. Trying to read this. I think I know what they're trying to say. The traffic logs that were done on the site. We had previously given you our video logs for the intersection. I'm also providing to you now the video logs for the actual entrance to our property, backing up the 7 days of data on which our traffic report was written. We have provided, you may remember when we were here before you previously on Winfield, there was a request for our admissions agreement. We provided a redacted version of that admissions agreement. As discussed at that meeting, some of it is of course proprietary, but I think the parts you were asking to see, which would be relevant here as well, are the kind of agreements that these residents make and the kind of commitments they're making to be there and the rules that govern their being there. You know, have a copy, and we will later read a letter in support into the record. I'd ask for all the evidence to be accepted in the record as our joint exhibits.
Are you doing it as one group exhibit, or are you going to do them individually?
I was going to do it as a group. I'm happy to walk through each one individually, but in the interest of time, I didn't know if you wanted me to walk through each one.
We'll take it as a group. I just don't know if you're going to refer to one, how you'll do it in the group.
We'll refer to them specifically based on whether it's the traffic report, which you have, the items. If there's any question, I'm happy to supplement them.
Okay, and the only thing I'd ask is, as you go along, if you would highlight how the increase of residents, staff, whatever, that difference, and then the impact and things of that nature.
Absolutely. And that was part of what I was starting off with is, so let's talk about the actual building itself. The increase of 4 additional residents has 0 impact on the building, either exterior or interior. That work's already been done, already approved by the county, already reviewed by the state, et cetera, where applicable. The same is true of our yard. I'll walk through some of the improvements there. Again, all of those improvements done. We'll talk about them in more detail, but it's a great question. The only real difference here isn't whether or not this property will continue to be used to serve a needed community, young adolescent girls with eating disorders. The only real question is whether or not we can serve 12 residents there instead of 8. The only additional staff, as you'll hear, will be 2 staff during the week and 1 staff on the weekend. All the rest of the staff doesn't change. And we anticipate, as you will hear, we actually expect, because those two staff are not coming during our peak hour, that in terms of a peak hour traffic impact, there is zero. But as a result of wanting to be conservative, as you'll hear when I walk through the traffic information, we actually added one just to be cautious, because you never know if someone's going to show up late or early, but none of them are scheduled to occur during our peak hour. That being said, I'd like to walk up to our traffic study prepared by KLOA. Just jumping ahead for a second. I apologize, actually. I'm going to step back for 1 second before that. When we were talking about the existing improvements in the property, just to walk through a few of those, the Montanito has put in over 50 trees and shrubs on the property since they bought it to screen the parking areas for the street and neighbors' properties. They've added additional paving to create an area to park 4 cars. All of this done for the original use with 8 residents. And to park 4 cars on the east side and 4 cars on the west side of the house. Installed a handicap accessible parking space and ramp for accessibility. Installed a new septic system designed for 12 clients and staff and approved by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. And installed a 12-foot by 16-foot patio in the rear yard for outside dining with adjacent urban vegetative plantings and privacy screenings. And while I'm not going to enter them separately in the record, in that PowerPoint presentation I talked about, there's a beautiful picture of the house, and throughout some of the other pictures of the interior, if you have any questions on that.
Let's just pause for a minute. Let's make the site plan 1, the landscape plan exhibit 2, the topographic plan 3, whatever your application and the supporting documents 4, all the traffic thing. One's a traffic evaluation. There's 2 charts. We'll make that the next exhibit. Is that 6?
I had you at 5.
5, okay. And the property evaluation impact study would be then the next one? 6. The residential admission agreement will be 7. And are you asking for this letter to be made your exhibit, or is that just going to be a individual exhibit?
We're going to actually have, because they're not able to be here today, Megan will read it to the record for you.
All right, that'll be 8. And so that way now you can just act accordingly.
Can I make 9 the PowerPoint? Because I just referenced the pictures on there. And I'll keep my list up here. The other exhibits identified to you, I don't really expect to walk through individually.
Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. I don't think we missed any of the key ones, but if I do, I've got a list and we'll add it here. All right, so let me walk right into the traffic evaluation. And I will say that usually I'm here and working either for or in front of other governmental bodies on projects that have a significant traffic impact. But I think you'll see from the numbers here, the numbers are incredibly small. But let's go back to where we were on it. KLOA conducted a site traffic evaluation for the property, capacity increase from 8 beds to 12. In order to determine the existing volumes of traffic, they did 24-hour traffic counts on 7 consecutive days from Tuesday, February 23rd to March 1st. You have in both the traffic report, which is Exhibit 5, includes both the counts at the intersection and the counts in front of the building. I want you to note that we used 2 different types of traffic counts for this. The real state of the art right now is to use video counts. They're considered to be 95% accurate or greater. And we did that both in front of the property and at the intersection. We also did do a backup count with the sort of rollover counters, the tube counters you've seen in the roads. Unfortunately, in winter and freezing times, as you may remember, it definitely was last November, those tend to show inaccurate numbers, and that's why you use the video counts to make those the primary. Everything in our report, as a result, all of the conclusions of KLOA in their report are based on those video counts because that's the most accurate information. And based on those traffic counts, the morning peak hour occurs from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock a.m., and the evening peak hour occurs from 4:15 to 5:15. Given COVID, the pandemic, pre-pandemic traffic count comparisons throughout the Chicago area, the peak hour traffic counts were increased by approximately 25% to reflect normal pre-pandemic traffic conditions. In addition to these counts, we did, as I said, the intersection and used all of that data to come up with the conclusions. Based on the collected data, the morning peak hour generation from the facility was 4 inbound vehicles and 1 outbound vehicle, while the weekday evening peak hour generation was 1 inbound vehicle and 1 outbound vehicle. This means that the facility's peak hour traffic generation amounts to 0.7%. Not 7%, 0.7% of the existing morning peak hour traffic and 0.2% of the existing evening peak hour traffic. Once they had that baseline data, they then estimated the number of trips generated by the proposed increase. As I discussed, and as we provided in the reports, residents here do not have cars, so therefore there's no additional cars because of the residents. There are 2 additional staff during the week, neither of whom are scheduled during peak hours, but as I mentioned, to be conservative, we assumed 1 could come in during that time, and 1 additional on the weekend when numbers are significantly less. The net result of all of that is that, I should go through 1 or 2 other more things. Additional trips to group home are made by deliveries and physicians. However, consistent with these current conditions, these trips vary. They don't necessarily occur in the peak hours of adjacent traffic and do not result in a statistically significant trip generator for the group home on a daily basis. While family visits are permitted, these visits are limited to the weekdays after dinner or on the weekend during a 3-hour time period on Saturday and Sunday. And therefore, again, those family visits occur when traffic along Modaf Road is approximately 31% less than it is during weekday peak hours. As you can imagine, currently, family visits are not permitted given COVID-19, but will resume. And typically, based on historical data, the facility receives approximately 2 to 3 visits on a weekday in the evening. We then combine those traffic volumes with the projected traffic volumes and conducted capacity analysis of the intersection of Modaf Road and 80th Street. You've got the report, so I'm just going to jump to the conclusion given the desire for time. But as you can see from the report, that intersection with our traffic is operating, without our traffic is operating at a level A or level B condition, depending on the direction. Our traffic, as you can imagine, at 0.2 or 0.7 does not change that level. So you're at the highest levels of traffic that can occur at those intersections. We also checked this against existing and future traffic volumes along 80th Street against the national standards, all of which are consistent with those national standards for both 80th Street and Modaf. And also review that against the published journals, Urban Land Institute, National Association of Home Builders, American Society of Civil Engineers, and Institute of Transportation Engineers, which indicate the neighborhood roadways typically carry significantly larger traffic volumes. As such, the conclusion of our traffic engineer in his report is that the increase in bed capacity of the facility at 80th Street will maintain its existing operational characteristics. They made the following conclusions in their report. The proposed increase will be a low traffic, the proposed use, I apologize. Proposed use and the increase in capacity by 4 beds will be a low traffic generator and will have a minimal impact on the traffic operation of the roadway system, as the overall building right now has a low impact. The new trips will be generated by the additional staff occur outside of peak hours, and will not have an impact on the peak hour traffic generation. Trips made by delivery vehicles vary and do not result in additional regular trips made to or from the facility. Family visits, as I said, occur on weekends when the traffic is 31% lower. 80th Street will continue to operate as a local roadway, carrying significantly less than the number of trips that it's designed for. We also did go out and measured 80th Street. There'd been some question raised for us as to whether or not this was a full-size roadway. And when I asked for proof, I'm going to ask David Resendes to actually prove this part of this, because he's the one that went out and measured it. And David, I believe you said it was 22 or 23 feet wide, depending on where you measured it, with your county and the national standards being 21 feet. At this point, would you rather have approved everything at the end or prove it now?
Why don't you just go through them all? And,
Go through all of it now. Great. Then in that case, at this point, I'd like to ask Andrew Lyons with Cone Resnick to come up for his 2-minute presentation on property values. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Gershon's a bit of a sprayer, so I appreciate that. 2 minutes. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Andrew Lyons. I've been a general certified commercial real estate appraiser in the state of Illinois since 2007 and earned my designation as a member of the Appraisal Institute in 2012. My firm specializes in real estate, and I've conducted impact studies on a wide variety of property types since I started my career, including big box retail and transmission lines and quarries and solar fields. So I was very surprised when I was called to do this particular facility. Generally, because I'm sure it's a question in your mind, we see that there is a deleterious use when it physically impacts an adjacent property. If you're next to a quarry and there's blasting and rocks are thrown out of somebody's lawn or the ground shakes, that's going to impact your house, and that's what's going to force people to want to leave early and sell at a low rate. And that's the general concern. We did a number of things in looking at this particular use. We performed impact studies for similar uses. There's one in Glenview called the Discovery Center, and we looked at homes within 2,500 feet of that large home in Glenview, and then compared that to another concentric ring around the outside going from 2,500 up to a mile. And when we looked at those statistics over a 2-year period that Discovery Center was operating, we didn't see any negative influence by being closer to that use in Glenview. We did the same in Medford, Massachusetts, which was actually another Montanito facility, which is really great to be able to compare and contrast. The average home price in that neighborhood in Medford is about $750,000. Again, we looked at multiple transactions and didn't find any negative influence as caused by being in closer proximity to Montanito's use. We examined published studies. The published studies that we find, including one that was done in NYU that looked at supportive living housing from 1981 through 2005, found that properties within 500 feet were not negatively impacted. In fact, in most cases, they were a little bit higher. And so that's kind of the standard things that are usually asked of us, but I'm sure you're curious about this particular road. 80th Street is really unique. You've got these really large 2-acre lots. It's kind of a mixed development. You have some homes that were built in the 60s and 70s, which are kind of regular and then a little bit smaller. And then over the last 10 years, these very large ultra-luxury buildings, almost like mega mansions, of which Montanito's facility is one of those uses. And so just looking at some of the sales right around there, generally speaking, that street and the neighborhood around it, most of the homes have been selling over the last couple of years between $150 to $200 a square foot, depending on their size. And that really hasn't changed a whole lot since Montanito opened their facility, just as a group home. But I was really interested to see how this may have impacted the really large homes. What we've identified is that before Montanito acquired their property, there was one that was 2 doors down that sold in 2016 for, I believe it was $1.275 million. A couple years later, Montanito acquires their facility at 127. Again, really large, 6,000 to 8,000 square foot masonry homes, very, very large. There wasn't another sale of a mega mansion in that little neighborhood until 2 months ago. And 2 months ago, literally 2 homes north of the Montanito facility, a very large mega mansion sold for $1,575,000. So as a real estate appraiser, just taking that very micro look at the data points right around the facility, there's an increase in value or increase in prices for similar homes right in the same neck of the woods. And so looking at all the data, contiguous, the Glenview study, the study in Massachusetts, the published studies that we looked at, and just looking at the data that's right in there in Naperville, I don't see any reason to think that changing it to a group quarters, which doesn't involve expanding the existing footprint of the building or influencing any physical nature against any of the adjacent property, I can't see why it would have any undue influence on property values adjacent to it. I'm happy to answer any of your questions if you have any.
Just a quick question. You touched on part of it, the change to group quarters. It's also a change from 8 residents to 12 residents. Did you factor that in?
Yeah, so the Medford study that we looked at was 10 residents at one time, and one of the published studies that we reviewed also was done on a 12 unit or 12 residents treatment facility. And so I felt like we had data that was in line with this change to additional residents. But for me, again, the thing is, they're not expanding the footprint of this extremely large residence anyway. It's the same footprint.
Isn't it a little bit of a stretch that there's an inventory shortage in Naperville and DuPage County? That of course homes would sell more because there's not that many homes for sale. So, you know, I mean, you may be right on all that, but I just think that's a little bit of a stretch.
So if that were 100% true in what you're saying, well, it just automatically went up. Remember that the difference between the sale dates from when Montanito acquired their facility, which was in, I know Jennifer, you're right there, and you know this off the top of your head. June 26, 2019. And then just 2 years later, $300,000 more.
Right, because there's an inventory shortage of homes in DuPage County and probably across the country. So that's fine. I just wanted to just say that. So keep going. It's good.
Okay, any other questions?
I was going to wait till the end. Does any other board member have a question? Okay, no.
Let me ask Andrew. Sorry. Step back a second. I just want to ask Andrew 2 things. You did do studies on other properties occurring prior to COVID, which are in your report.
Correct.
Did you find that there was any adverse impact on those properties with price values going down based on this use?
No.
Or based on, okay. So I don't disagree with you. I think that some of this is certainly caused by COVID, but the studies he did were prior to COVID, so therefore.
And I'm not disagreeing that it may not have any impact, just realize there's a shortage.
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
Your burden tonight, if you agree with me, is you have to show the difference now to change the terminology and the number of individuals. At the prior hearing, when you got the first conditional use, you proved out that it didn't decrease land values, traffic, and everything else. You're now showing if this new request changes any of that, correct?
Yes, with one slight correction. The current use is a permitted use in your district, not a conditional use. You do have standards that we had to prove up for that permitted use. So currently there is not a permitted use there, but you're right. We had to show we met all of your standards for an 8-person group home, And now we've got a conditional use for the large use.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to make sure that I didn't miss one thing, or two items on here. Just to clarify again, the 7 days in which the traffic counts were taken were from February 23rd to March 1st. I want to make sure I got those dates correct when I said them. And I didn't submit it on the record. I don't think you would typically need that. We certainly have a copy of it. But the primary code we're talking about, which is your subdivision regulations, which calls for a road width of 22 feet, it's your subdivision regulation, so I didn't provide a copy of it. Certainly can do that if you want, but wanted to make sure that both of those were there.
And you finished your traffic now, right?
Correct.
Do you want to have him just certify that what you said is?
Absolutely. Javier, would you confirm for the record that all of the evidence I provided regarding your traffic study is true and correct? And if it's not, please step up and correct it.
It was correct.
And just for the record, I've been asked by Paul, because the people on Zoom can't hear it, just confirm that Javier Milan with KLOA just confirmed that those statements were correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if I might as well do it while I'm starting that. David Resendez, would you also stand up? David, again, is the Vice President of Facilities. He is the one who provided the evidence I gave on the improvements done at the site, the 50 new trees and bushes that were put there, as well as the measurement of the roads. Same question for you. Would you confirm that everything I stated was true and correct, or please come up and correct it?
One minor change.
Sorry, I just wanted to get, Mark had said that we had a parking area for 4 cars on each side of the building. The house has a garage on either side, and we have space for 9 cars on one side and 4 cars on the other side. We did expand a little on either side, but that's what we have existing.
While we have you there, I have one question. I noticed when I read this in, you're on well and septic.
Yes.
What will be the effect of the 4 additional residents and the additions in staff and the additions of people coming for visitations?
So we had to expand the existing septic system, and in order to expand it for 12 clients, the County Board of Health told us that it was too big, or they only certified up to 8 beds. So we got our system certified by Illinois EPA, and it's designed for the 12 beds and our staff and visitors. So we don't have to do any more work to the system.
All right, do you have any documents on that? Because our health department they stated no comments, or we received no comments from the health department. So if you've done that to the septic system there, we're going to need the supporting documentation.
Sure, can I send that by email or something? I don't have it with me.
We'll coordinate with you.
I think we have it.
And just stay for 1 second, Dave. The other thing I think which is accurate is that when the improvements were done to the house, and again, it was originally, we were very open about this. We indicated that while we would operate it as 8 units, we truly wanted to be in a position, if the need was great, to be able to move it to the 12, which obviously is why we're before you today. So all of these improvements are already there and were reviewed and approved as part of your building permit and C of O, all of the improvements for that facility, correct?
Correct. The only change will be some additional furniture.
Okay, do you want to just make that for the
Yeah, for the record, what he just said was the only change will be the additional furniture.
And then what I just requested is any documents by anybody from your side go to you, and then they're forwarded to the office, and we will get them before, depending if we close tonight, before the recommendation meeting, and then if board members have questions, we can do it that night.
Sure. Happy to do that.
Great.
Again, with the knowledge that you've got our written responses on the standards, and in the interest of time, knowing you're trying to keep the meeting down from a time standpoint, I'm not going to walk through each of the standards. I'm obviously happy to do that. I've actually never in my 30 years doing this had a board actually say, yes, Mark, please walk through every standard, but I always have to ask. So if you'd like us to walk through any of the standards, or more importantly, if there's any standard you feel we haven't addressed, or haven't addressed in our documentation, et cetera, please let us know. We're happy happy to do so. But again, you have a written response in each of those. One of those standards is the benefit to the community, whether there's adverse impacts on the community. As I stated earlier, this is a true need. These are young women, young girls. I'm a father of 2 girls, and I completely understand this and respect it, that who are in need of treatment. And I think the best way for me to tell you about that is if you'll give me 30 seconds for a quick story of one of the first people who was treated at this facility when it opened last June. 17-year-old girl, severely and dangerously underweight, started with us, I guess, actually, and came back recently to the facility. She had tried outpatient, it didn't work. Came back to the facility to come back and thank the staff because she has now recently won her, I apologize, I don't know if it's a regional or local track meet, but won the local track meet, which you can imagine a girl in this situation before this treatment could never have happened. And as a father of 2 daughters who are going to prom, I know how important that is. She's going to prom. And it's a real life-changing event. I don't want to minimize that in anything I'm saying here, and truly appreciated that this use is already permitted here, and that with the minimal impact, we hope you will agree that should also be permitted to continue. What else has happened here? We've got upkeep and beautification of this property, obviously some significant improvements that were done. As we said, this really enriches the community. It has an incredibly minimal effect on traffic. Those numbers, 0.2 and 0.7% increase, are as low as I've probably ever presented before, and on the surrounding area. And as you've heard, no adverse economic impact on surrounding properties. At this point, I'd like to turn it over so that you can ask any questions you have and allow for any community comment. I apologize, with one exception. I'm going to ask Megan, we had a letter of support, which I was asked to read into the record, and I'm going to have Megan read that in.
You know what, I don't think we need to read the letter in. We've accepted in evidence. We don't allow people to read statements in. It's a letter of support for the people on Zoom. If you need to see it, it's available. It supports the project and highlights the benefits of it. What I'd like to do before we go forward, I should have done it sooner. Paul, would you do a favor for the record and everybody on Zoom and the people from the community here? Maybe you could give a short explanation, the change from group home to group quarters.
So, under the DuPage County zoning ordinance, a group home is a use that's permitted as of right. It is treated as a single-family home. The allowances are up to 8 people who have either a disability or are over the age of 55. In addition, a group home allows for, in addition to the 8 people who have either disability or over 55 years of age, it allows for 2 caregivers to be in the home on a permanent basis. In addition, if it's a disability that is an issue here, the applicant needs to provide some sort of documentation that the disability is sanctioned or certified by some organization. In this case, for this particular property, the Joint Review Board, which reviews all hospitals in the United States, has provided documentation to the county that this particular type of affliction does qualify as a disability. So the use on this property right now is considered a group home. And the difference between a group home and what the petitioner is asking for tonight is that when you exceed 8 people, our ordinance allows for conditional use for a group dwelling quarters. And the group dwelling quarters has no limitation on the numbers, but as part of the conditional use, we ask the applicant to identify what amount of people they will be having there. In this case, the group dwelling that this petitioner is asking for is 12. So they're asking to go from a group home, which allows 8 as of right, to go to 12, and because they're exceeding the 8 and going to 12, that requires the conditional use procedure that we're having here tonight.
And by the conditions being put on it, they'll be limited to 12. unless they come back and seek more.
Correct, and any conditional use is, the reason we call it conditional uses is the state statute usually refers to these types of activities as special uses. The county calls them conditional uses, they're interchangeable nomenclature, but we call them conditional use for that express purpose of potentially putting conditions on the zoning relief that could make it clear what the county board ultimately would be approving if they choose to approve this zoning relief. In addition, there can be other conditions placed on zoning relief to mitigate any concerns or impact that the board or county board finds might be associated with the use.
And as a matter of practice, this board so far, one of the conditions has been that the person making the application, the condition is purely theirs. If they were to sell or leave the facility, the condition ends, correct?
Historically, this board has placed a condition that the entitlement, the zoning entitlement goes not only to the property but also to the applicant. It does not run with the land.
Anything, council, that you want to add or take exception with?
I'll say it right now.
Okay.
Give me a 10 mics.
There's, council agrees with it. I noticed, are you members of the public? Does anybody wish to make a comment or ask a question?
I do.
All right, those that do, we have 20 minutes left. Why don't you raise your hand, stand up and be sworn in. And our process, I'll tell you how we do it is, somebody's going to start and someone's going to end. So whoever gets up first goes up. You state your name, spell your name, give your address, say how close it is to the property in question. We give a little bit more time to the people who live closer. And right in the beginning, so we know where you're coming from, you're either in favor of it or you're against it, and then give your statement. If after the first speaker, if the following speakers agree with it, you can say you agree with it. We don't need you to repeat every fact. Having said that, why don't you be sworn in, and then whoever wants to go first, we'll just go back and forth.
Like a quick clarification, are we doing questions and comments together at this?
Questions to the chair. Questions to you.
Responses and then comments?
Well, all right, why don't you, if you just have some questions, why don't you direct questions to me, we'll get them answered. Maybe that'll cut, maybe you may not feel the need to speak then. Are you the only, or do you all have questions, just one person? All right, what is your question?
I have a couple of them. The first is, I was just wondering, you referred to residents several times. I was wondering how many residents were counted there in the 2020 census? How many residents are there?
You know what, why don't we do this? I think we have two members on Zoom, the public might be on. Why don't you go up, you're not testifying, you can ask your questions in the mic so people can hear them, and then we'll go from there. State your name, spell it, so we know who's asking the questions, and give us, we didn't swear them in yet, did we?
No, not any.
All right, why don't we swear everybody in, and then we'll,
Would you raise your right hands, please? You do solemnly swear or affirm that testimony you're about to give at this cause now and hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
My name is Rick Covert, C-O-V-E-R-T, just like Covert Ops. And I live one house removed to the west from the Montanito property. My question first is, as far as residents, what was the count for the 2020 census for residents at that property? Does anybody know?
You want me to ask questions now or ask them?
how many questions do you have?
I have, I guess, probably three. No, maybe two. I think I only have two.
All right, why don't you ask the two questions,
All right.
and then he can go to the microphone so everybody can hear and answer
The
them.
second question would be...
Did you understand that question? I wasn't quite clear on it.
How many, we referred to residents on the property currently.
And you pursuant to what? You said it was taken for what purpose?
Yeah, I want to know how many residents were there for the 2020 census. How many were counted as being on that property for the 2020 census? How many residents? Because we're talking about residents. It was referred to several times. Okay, so
I don't know if they qualify under the census to be residents. Do you know that, Council?
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I don't know. As you said, it's a temporary use. You often there about 60 days, give or take. I honestly don't know enough census law to know whether or not they would be counted for that on that basis. My understanding, not a legal understanding, is that if someone indicates they reside at the facility the day they come, then they count them, but that, we weren't here to testify on the census, so I can't tell you that's exactly.
For the period that you've had the other conditional use, you've never exceeded more than 8, what you call residents, in-home people being taken care of.
Correct.
And somewhere here it says you usually end up about 94% by the end of the year. So there's people that aren't staying their full, it's a 6-month treatment, is it?
No, this typically, there's no exact time. It's typically about 60 days. 60 days. Right, about 60 days, but it depends on the individual person. Part of it is your code, right? Your code indicates that only a certain number of people can reside in the home, and that is 8 for the current use, and it would be 12 if this use is approved. We have never had more than 8 people residing in the home, and demand has been high, so we've typically had 8 people since it came up to full occupancy.
I think we're confusing their residential facility and their residents while they're there. But I don't think they're considered residents for the consensus. If that's a major thing, I guess we can get an answer for you. What's the basis of that for?
Yeah, well, you want me to go on from that? My question is I can answer that, I guess, because I do know that there was 0 residents there. And so what we have there is a building with no residents that we're calling a group home, and I think it would be important for an actual group home to have residents. I lived previously for 18 years next to an actual group home. Those people were all counted as living in that group home because they're long-term people with long-term disabilities that are...
But I think this is different than like an elderly house where they're going to live there for years.
It is different.
It's a treatment center where they're in and out, and I don't think they're considered residents for that.
Correct, it's a treatment center, yeah, not a group home, correct.
Well, for purposes of our code, it's a group home to treat people.
Right, we've called it that, and I realize we've crossed the Rubicon on that, so it's there now.
Okay.
I understand that. So that was my point. Point number 1, there's no residents there. They're not, the definition does say they're supposed to be long-term residents. There's not even residents. The other thing I wanted to know, when you did the check on appraisals, property values, did you look at market time? How was that affected?
With the exception of one home that was improperly...
Excuse me, I'm going to need you to go to the microphone, please.
Is that the last question then?
Yeah, that'll be
All right,
my last question.
then, can you get questions then? All right, why don't we have the answer to that question, and we'll go to you for questions, and then we can go to statements.
I'm assuming you're talking about your street, correct?
Correct. I can answer
Okay.
the other question raised.
Sure. With the exception of one house, that was improperly listed, they all sold at reasonable marketing times. I think that the home that he's concerned about, which was a home that we looked at and spoke to the broker about, had initially been listed for over $1 million and ended up selling for $585,000. But that was before Montanito opened. That was before they opened. But when we talked to the broker, Walter Burrell of Coldwell Banker, and he said the family's selling the home, which is asking way too much for the property, which previously sold for $387,000 in November of 2019. So $1.2 million was unrealistic the whole way. Thanks.
Just a brief response, on the second part of that question, whether or not these are in fact residents, whether or not this is a group home. These issues were raised earlier in an objection before the facility originally opened as a group home. Both the DuPage County Zoning Department, DuPage County State's Attorney's Office, and Public Works, which doesn't really quite apply to that question, but all filed a reply brief on those questions confirming that under your codes, these are residents pursuant to your code. They do meet the requirements for a group home, and they were therefore allowed to operate.
That's what I was trying to get to. I think the question of whether they count in a census or something, my gut reaction is they don't, and I don't see the bearing unless you lose a congressional seat over 8 people.
I see it entirely different. Are you asking or are you trying to go
Well,
down the
I'm just
path?
making a
Hold
point.
on, that other people live there outside of the 8 people being treated at any one time?
Well, my point is really just that these,
You know
the
what?
reason we call this what it is.
Nobody's hearing any of this, and I don't know if you're having trouble taking this down. That wasn't, your question was exactly, can you speak up, or do you want the microphone?
My question was, is Mr. Kerwin going down the path that he may believe, but he won't quite say it, that other people may be living in that home under different circumstances?
I'm not saying they exceeded the
Fine,
8.
thank you.
The question from the board was the individual trying to ask if people are living in the home and not declaring it, and that's not it, so we don't need to address that issue at all.
If anybody has a question, I can certainly state that for the record and have people do it, but there, as I said, I did
I
say
think your submittals, while we have a prior record, it was for a different use, it's enlarging it, but at all times you've laid out how that works, so.
Exactly. Thank you.
Questions? Yeah?
I got a question about food being delivered there, and also,
Jack, let's finish with the people and then we'll come back.
okay,
Okay. If we can get them all out tonight, we may be able to not have to.
Eddie Bedford, Bedford. I reside around the corner on Meadow Park Lane, and the question I have is, how did you come or determine your peak time? Because I leave at their place at all different times of the day, morning and night. And I want to know, how did you determine your peak time for the traffic studies and such?
Well, one of the two of you use the mic so they can hear.
Good evening, my name is Javier Moan, and I'm a principal of KLA. To determine the peak time, analysis or traffic analysis looked at the peak hours of the adjacent street, what you've seen here. So we want to know what is the facility going to generate during that peak hour, because that's what they're going to contribute during the highest travel hour. So we looked, like Mark said, it was 8 to 9 a.m. and then at 4:15 to 5:15. So then we looked at the facility during the 7 days. During those 7 days, what was the highest trip generation during that time? And that's what we added.
Javier, please repeat this from the microphone. Can you please also confirm you actually take counts that are broken down in 15-minute increments for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
That's correct.
Repeat what he said, and then you're going to agree with him.
Traffic counts are collected every 15 minutes. In this case, we did it 7 days, 24 hours a day, so it's 168 hours of data collected every 15 minutes. So we know exactly what was generated every 15 minutes.
Any other questions? All right, if there, anybody want to speak? Yeah, go ahead. You know the drill, name, spell it, address, for it or against, and then your reasons.
Okay, my name is Joe Wysocki. That's spelled Wysocki. I'm against this. I object. My property is 27W071, so I am right next to this property in question, next to the facility. I share a property line. I'm just to the east of it. I basically just have 3 points that I'd make. First and foremost, it's about the neighborhood. You've already heard these are large 2.5-acre lots. The street, while it meets standards, has no sidewalks, has no street lights. This is an equestrian neighborhood, so people have horses that go up and down the street. So this is a very residential, quiet area. If you walk down the street, you're more than likely to run into an animal off the forest preserve than you would an individual. My point here is that in the 10 months that this operation has been in operation, or has been operating, we have had 9 emergency vehicle calls to this facility. I don't know specifically what they told you because I saw the application where they listed 6. I live right next door. I've reported them to Paul as complaints. I'm sure he can forward those complaints on to you to verify them. There were additional emergency vehicle calls to this facility that they did not put in that initial application. In 10 months, 9 events. That's essentially 1 per month. If you step back and think of the character of this neighborhood, it's completely out of character to have emergency vehicles up and down this street at any time like that. My second point here is about the safety of our neighborhood. We are all in agreement that the cause is good, but let me tell you a story about myself and my neighborhood. On the 4th of July, that weekend when we had emergency vehicles come screaming down our road, all of the residents come out of their house because that activity does not happen on our street. And the police tell the individuals that there is an escaped individual who has suicidal tendencies that they are looking for. The employees of Monte Nido facility are going door to door to try to find this individual. I have kids that are playing in the front yard. I've had kids sleeping in the backyard in tents over that weekend trying to enjoy our forest preserve quiet nature facility. I am now in jeopardy. My safety is compromised. There's an individual on the loose. We don't know if they will do harm to themselves or harm to the neighborhood. All of these buildings on this property or on this in this neighborhood have separate buildings to take care of their yards. Sharp objects, tractors, take care of their horses. Those can do harm to that individual or worse yet, harm to other people. It only takes one event, and going from 8 to 12 is a 50% increase, a 50% increase that my safety is going to be compromised. The last point that I would make is on the use of my yard. As I said, I am right next to them, so the back quarter acre of my lot faces directly to them. When I moved in, I had a natural barrier between myself and the neighbor of bushes and trees and tall grass. And we decided to take that down because we wanted to have more of a community and have more light shed between us and share the natural preserve of the area. That's now gone, and so I have a backyard where I have 8, as you have already said, temporary individuals there. They don't stay on the property. I have witnessed them go off the property. Someone back at the house say, "You've gone too far," and they respond, "We're not going to go that much further," and they continue to go off that property. I have young children who try to play in that backyard. I no longer feel it's safe for them to be there. They have witnessed therapy sessions, overheard outbreaks, overheard languages and conversations that young children would not normally hear in a residential area that they now hear. And so my use, my enjoyment of my property is now inhibited by this operation, and going from 8 to 12 is a 50% more increase in the disruption of my land. So that's basically it. I object, and I beg if you please reject this.
Yes.
Oh, they did not say whether they were for or against. So if I did.
They were only asked questions.
Would they like to say whatever?
They're going to get up and speak.
Oh, right.
Maybe.
Just quickly on a few things here. This is a facility that is currently run and would continue to be run under strict state guidelines. We've submitted to you a copy of our admissions agreement, which shows the level of controls that are there. I want to be very clear. We've had 0 incidents of any physical altercation with residents or neighbors. And in fact, the only verbal incident or verbal altercation was by a neighbor to a resident and a staff member. The person we're talking about who had left there, and everyone here hopefully is familiar with HIPAA, I cannot talk about individual people's treatment, etc. But that person did what's called an elopement. They left the facility. For those of you who've had teenagers, you won't be shocked. Left the facility to go get a Coke, went out on their own, came back to the facility, just as, quite honestly, my 5 kids are able to walk outside and walk around our community.
Maybe you could do one thing, just for people that are on Zoom. When you use the word elopement, she didn't run off and get married or anything. So let's clarify that so we don't have
I am so glad you asked the question, because when I heard elopement, I'll admit I thought, elopement? No, elopement apparently is a term of art where someone leaves the facility. Remember, these people are not these people are not imprisoned on this site. They are free individuals. There are requirements for them for coming and going. But so therefore, that's not the restriction. But yes, very clearly, elopement means, and if Japanese, you can correct me, but essentially means someone who leaves the facility voluntarily.
I've heard it used for that. I just wanted for the record so nobody's calling in and saying, especially on their age, they're running off and getting married or something. So.
No, thank you for correcting me on that, for like having to come out. The intake process is very strenuous. These exact things are screened for. Anyone who has violent tendencies, has other issues like that, is not allowed into the program. That's not what we treat here. These are young girls from our community, from this area, from the surrounding areas, who are looking for and need this assistance, and very clearly acquired a very large home on a large piece of property to make sure they had the area in which to do that. The goal is to treat young girls and return them to their normal lives, and as the story I told you indicates, that's the case. I should also confirm in terms of mental health issues. The issues here with these girls, there's no known socioeconomic status that causes eating disorders amongst girls. Every level of economic status can have the issue. Characteristics of someone, these are your neighbors, they're young women of DuPage County and others, in other areas. The characteristics of someone with an eating disorder are the following. They're high perfectionists, they have harm avoidance, and they have a desire for approval. They typically do not have conduct disorders and are not combative. And that's why we do those studies to ensure that. So the assumption, I hope that's good news for you, the assumption that these are dangerous girls there is simply not the case. That's not what this program is. There certainly could be other group homes for other purposes where that would be a concern. It is not the concern here. Thank you. Oh, I apologize. You had another question. Can I ask Jennifer Gallagher?
You know what, sir?
And answer the question on the food.
When there's a break, then.
Okay.
All right.
Nobody address the emergency vehicles? I'll address the emergency vehicles as well that was raised. We do keep a log of the emergency vehicles. I believe that our log shows that there were 7 public emergency vehicles that came to the site. There were also, I believe 6 or 7, I didn't bring that with me, 6 non-public vehicles that are used for transport. Some of those vehicles are private ambulances, in particular during COVID, because we use those vehicles to bring someone to the hospital or back. But in terms of an impact on the area, we're talking about an average of less than 1 such vehicle per month. Unfortunately for me, I've both experienced having myself and 3 of my children taken in 4 ambulances out of our house due to carbon monoxide poisoning, and 3 or 4 days ago experienced an ambulance, 2 police cars, and a fire truck taking my neighbor's son out for a stomach issue. The reality is that this is not something new that's occurring just because of this house. And we're very proud of our relationship with the public safety in the county and in Naperville, who've been taking care of those issues. But again, we're talking about less than 1 trip per month, 1 visit per month that's occurred. And at least one of those visits was when they came to double check our smoke detectors. Yeah. I'm going to let Jennifer answer and clarify something I just said.
All right, when we started, we said we were going to try to adhere to an hour. We're over the hour. What is the anticipation? You pointed the answer. How long has been on this point?
I was just going to clarify the emergency business order.
Okay. And what is your gut reaction on when you get up to give your statement? How long is it going to take?
I don't know, but I can say it right now.
Well, no, we can't.
I can't, because my property value went down. All right. I know that. I'll just say it now. I know it.
All right, just let the record reflect that he suggested because his property value went down, so now we're down to 1 speaker. We'll take it, and then we should wrap it up. We'll go a little bit longer.
I'll be real quick. I just wanted to clarify on the log that was submitted of the.
You want to meet more?
I'm sorry. I'm Jennifer Gallagher with Montanito on the log of emergency vehicles. I just wanted to point out, first off, we don't like emergency vehicles coming to the house anymore. than our neighbors do. But 3 of those vehicles were fire trucks, actually 4, related to faulty heat sensor in the attic, the hood above the stove not functioning properly twice. We've now replaced that hood. And one trip was the fire department coming back to check on us the day after the smoke alarm went off and wanted to have a tour of the facility. Of those emergency vehicles, only 3 were true emergencies. As our attorney said, we cannot go into the details on the person who left unsupervised, but that was a big teachable moment for the staff. Montanito operates facilities all over the country, has been for 25 years. People leaving unescorted, those are very rare incidents. The staff took this very personally. They changed procedures. They changed some of the areas where the clients were allowed to be unsupervised. And so it was a big deal for us. We took it very seriously, and there hasn't been any issue since then.
Just a quick question. Do you accept their numbers as the number of calls?
Can I speak on it?
No, I'm asking you, do you want to submit a written FOIA to the county to get the number of calls?
I have tried, I got denied.
And do you accept that do you want to know how many other calls were? If there were so many that it broke the tranquility of the neighborhood, or how they match with you, or is this just that's your statement that the number of vehicles that came over the period of time, I think you said 8 in 10 months, or even if it's 1 a month, it's interrupted your enjoyment. Do you want to show the number overall?
If I understand it, his number is 8 or even 9, and ours is 7. I'll submit to the record that we may agree to disagree, but I don't believe that over a year period that 1 or 2 difference has an impact on the project.
All right, I think that's good enough. I'm going to get feedback if you come over here with that with the speaker. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm opposed. I don't think that's a.
Started just, so I think you'll know who you are.
Yep, my name is Rick Covert. I live at 9S130 Meadowlark Lane. I'm 1 house removed to the west. And yeah, an emphatic no on it because I believe it's a bad situation already. I don't believe it should have been put there in the first place, but it's there. I understand we crossed the Rubicon on that. It's done. It's in our backyard. It's the elephant in our living room. And, I thought we had codes that would kind of keep that from happening. And I think it really does. I think a reasonable reading of what a group home is would tell you that it doesn't belong there. It's a bad fit. I know this, we talk about it not having a negative effect on property value. Time is money. And anytime you live next door to a non-conforming property, something that's out of the ordinary, you make the group of people that are willing to buy that house less, which means it's going to spend more time on the market. That's just something we all understand. Time is money, so to say it has no effect, I think you even tried to allude to the fact that it had a positive effect, which is, come on. So, because I know whenever somebody comes to my house, and thank God I live to the west of the property, because I don't deal with all the nonsense that's going on down there. But anytime somebody comes to my house for the first time, they say, what was that? What's that down there? It doesn't look like a house. It's got, anytime I drive by, 8 to 12 cars. Always there. Now, I'm allowed to have 6, and they need to belong to me. It has to belong to a resident of the property. They get 8 to 12 every day. Those people come and go. That is my feeling on the thing. It's bad. And so we're sitting here tonight saying, do we want to make a bad thing just a little bit worse? And I say, no, we don't. We shouldn't, and I hope you don't.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Do you have anything other than property value or?
Well, since I've been there, I'm opposed. I'm not opposed to the facility that's there in existence. It's there. Just like you just said. But I had my house appraised 5 years ago. It's $645,000. I just refinanced my house a month ago at $548,000. The house that they were talking about, the 1.3 mil, the house that on the market, he was there before, it was on the market prior to. It's a 5-acre house, barn house, and it was listed at 1.3, which is probably typical for that property. It ended up selling for $586,000. The exact appraisal with my house 2 months ago. And as we said, and I think I'll be a little selfish, I have the best piece of property in that area. I back up to the Forest Preserve. It is a wonderful spot. I get the great sunsets every night. But the bottom line is the property has diminished. And the bottom line is I again agree that it is there. Expanding is problematic for me, my wife, and the neighborhood.
Before I open it up to questions to the board, Bob has sent in some questions. I think it's easier. You just take it, read his question, and give us the answer. And then board members have a couple questions, and let's try to shoot for it, at least not 7:30 at the latest. Then we're well within the restrictions of 60 to 90 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob Carnival, I'm going to read his questions from his email, and then we'll attempt to answer them. I'm just going to read it. He said, Jess, I would like the petitioner to supplement the record by telling us, first, total vehicles expected on site before and after the increase. Again, I'm not quite positive, but I think what he's asking, we are again talking about an addition of only 2 more staff. So we're not expecting more than 2 additional vehicles on the site on a typical day.
Which changes on Saturday, works one.
Well, only one on Saturday, correct. Total staff before and after the increase, we were trying to figure out again, because a lot of the staff is people who come in for shorter periods of time. Do we know, well, total staff at any given time at the facility?
Sure. Jennifer Gallagher. So in Monday through Friday, right now, over 24 hours, there's 14 staff that come in and leave. And the maximum at any one time is 10. So what's going to happen if this is approved is that maximum of 10 will go to 12 in the middle of the day. Does that answer the question?
That's what he's really looking for. What it is, what it's going to be.
Right. And the weekend number is lower than the total number of staff that come in and come out over 24 hours is 8, with no more than, I think it's 5 or 6 at any one time. And there'll be 1 additional staff taking that from 5 to 6 or 6 to 7. I'm sorry, I don't have that weekend number. That's the impact on the staff that will be at the facility.
The next question was the description of all outdoor activities and time limits on such activities.
Okay. So first off, I want to stress that all outdoor activities are supervised. Adolescent clients, adult clients are not allowed to leave the building without eyes on them all the time. The outside activities are limited to certain periods of the day. I don't have an exact schedule. If you'd like me to follow up, I'm happy to provide that.
Do you have a general time period that it's?
Well, first off, let me say that the vast majority, 95% of their treatment is done within the house.
And it's not going to change if you get 4 more?
No, sir. Okay. Because the additional 4 clients will participate in the existing groups. Okay.
I think it's fair for me to combine these 2 questions, but just I think the answer will be the same. Bob asked for the turnover of residents and the average length of stay for a resident. Those 2 questions combined.
So since the program opened in June of 2020, there have been 40 people who have been admitted to the program. Their average length of stay has just been under 60 days.
And that was in the statement of council. I had used 6 months for some reason, and you corrected me and said it's averaging 60 days.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit under because you were using 94%.
Well, and it's varied. Sometimes like the bed is empty for like a half a day, so it winds up being like 7.5 average census.
And the total number of residents admitted during 2020.
of that 40 that I just mentioned, I can't tell you off the top of my head how many of them were in 2020 from June to December, but I can tell you from June until yesterday, there have been the 40, I say 40 or 42?
So 40.
40, sorry.
Sorry, one more question from additional page. Can we get an idea of staff shifts, time of day, based on his earlier questions?
So, as we've said in the past, the staff is, there are no such things as shifts. They come in at different times on different days, but the bulk of the staff are there between 10 and 3. But the greatest number of staff, i.e. 4 during the week that come in at any one time, they're coming in either between 8 and 9, 9 and 10, or 10 and 11. There's that much variation. In terms of the departures, the maximum 5 out happens either between 5 and 6 or 6 and 7.
Is it safe to assume that with 4 additional residents, if you meet the 4, that the increase of visitors would go up by how many, 4 cars? And is it normally 2 parents or what? Do you have a limit on how many can come and visit?
Absolutely. All the visits are supervised. That's written in the admission agreement, and they're scheduled. They cannot just pop in. Because of COVID, we don't know what the real visitation is going to look like because so much of the visits have been virtual. Even parents have not been able to do visits as often as they would like. But I can tell you, going back to what our attorney said, typically at our other facilities, you're not going to have more than 2 or 3 visitors there at any one time for an 8-bed program. It may go up by 1 or 2 more visitors when we would go from 8 to 12. We purposely try to space out the visitation.
And Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want me to address the other issues or wait for our rebuttal period at the end.
Questions, and then you can get to your report.
Thank you.
I got 2 questions here. One is delivery of food, and also on the garbage, where is it stored and how is it picked up?
Okay. I may have to turn to Dave. Dave, come up here to talk about.
Just for purposes that too, which you mentioned, that at the present time, this is food. At the present time, this is garbage storage. This is any increase that we anticipate.
Got it. So on food, we have food deliveries coming by small delivery truck between 9 and 1. I'm not clear, I can double check, but I think it's a couple of times a week. In addition, there is the chef going out to the grocery store 2 or 3 times a week for fresh produce, usually in the middle of the day. When we would add 4 residents, you're not going to see any change in that activity. The truck is still going to bring sort of the larger food items that they bring, and the chef is still going to go out for those 2 grocery trips. Garbage, I'm going to turn over to the facilities guy.
So we have a 3-car. Sorry, we have a 3-car garage on the right side of the house. I don't know what, I think that's west. And we store the trash in there, the 90-gallon containers, and roll them out to the street for pickup on a regular basis. We just generate regular household trash. So.
That answer yours, Jack? Yep. All right, who else? No.
So, actually, a question for Mr. Bedford, Naperville Township Supervisor. Will that increase the tax dollars for the Naperville Township residents because more people are using the unincorporated group garbage service? I think it's still under group, isn't it?
It is still, on average, there's 5 to 6 kids out each day. I say that I go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and try to pick up these on these mornings. So I look and see, I'm probably there's 4 to 5 curb pickup with stuff on a little every now and then boxes on the side.
Does that cost township residents increased tax dollars?
Tax dollars going to groups, yes.
Because they're a residence, not a business.
Right, and the homeowners in the neighborhood have one can of trash pickup and one recycle.
Okay.
So they're exceeding what we have normally, but it's not costing them, I don't believe anything more, but I can buy that.
Well, that's a serious consideration for me because tax dollars increased as you taken away from the residents to there. In terms of the traffic, we're all getting food, Amazon deliveries, FedEx constantly as the work from home has kept on going. So
exactly, but you should realize, I don't know if any of you heard, but I heard all of their deliveries and all of that is beyond the peak hour, 2 hours that they highlight.
well, I see Amazon trucks going down my house, which is just east of there, not very far.
But we're specifically talking about.
So the other question is.
Well, you asked the question of me.
I did ask the question of you.
I'll make it right. No more questions to them. Make them comments.
Well, it's about them. Would you be willing to pay increased money to the township for increased garbage pickup?
To be clear, they do pay real estate taxes on their facility, paying for garbage. This isn't something they do for free. And when we talk about the difference, we expect limited. Clearly, there are 4 additional people there, residents. We do think there will be some increase in garbage, but most garbage, from household things, it doesn't exponentially increase based on the number of people who are there. So we do expect some increase, but
I'm not even sure that that's a valid point. Because you do pay real estate taxes, it's covered under the real estate taxes, unless you're gonna go down and take every resident and decide, this one has 1 can, this is 1.5, so he pays a little bit more, this one has 2. I don't know if that's valid, but that's something that's in your purview, and I don't think that's a condition we can put on. That's in my humble opinion. If I'm wrong, we can get a plan on it or make it a condition. I would not be.
So my next question is also to both parties here, since you are, even though you did not testify in that, he is the Naperville Township Supervisor. And one of the programs of Naperville Township is mental health and focusing on some of these programs. You do a wide variety of programs. So would you be willing to be involved in some more adolescent programs for eating disorders for young men and women and take over their roles, maybe move them somewhere else if that doesn't work in your neighborhood?
No, I don't think that's a good question. I'm not going to look at it. They've been approved. They're seeking an additional approval.
Whether he takes it over or not is not going to matter. It may cut into their profit margin, they may leave, but I don't see that that's valid. Unless you disagree with me, then let's. I think that's outside the germane of ours. Because in theory, government could take over everything. We wouldn't need anything private. So, any other questions? All right. Without handicapping, I know you've done it all. Can you do it in about 5 or 6 minutes?
I can do it less than that.
Okay.
Again, thank you. We appreciate the comments from the neighbors. Just want to add a few of the things that came up today. One, in terms of adverse impact on properties. Again, obviously, any impact on property values that's being alleged has occurred before this conditional use was granted. But I think clearly, to my knowledge, none of the people who spoke about economic impact indicated any expert knowledge, expert qualifications on property values and their impact. And it's always easier to be concerned about the unknown. The practical answer is the reason that we had Andrew Lyons do these studies and submit it, and Andrew Lyons does have some of the top expertise in the business, as he presented to you, is that he showed that in the real life situation where this is occurring, there is not adverse impact. So we're pleased to be able to rely on that. Again, I think, as has been emphasized here, we have to look at the fact that this is an existing use. That use is going to continue in this property. We're not here to discuss that, to discuss whether or not 8 young girls should be allowed to be treated here as they are being now. We're here to decide whether or not there's an adverse impact economically, in traffic, or in the other standards you have in your codes by increasing that by 4 beds. And also to look at that against that incredibly minimal impact, as I said, 0.2 or 0.7% on traffic, to look at that by comparison to the benefits to this community to serving the people of this community and the surrounding areas. And we think those benefits are incredibly significant. This is a true tragedy what's happening to adolescent girls right now in this area, a tragedy that's getting worse. I'll admit I feel differently and strongly about it because they're my children, but I also know young women who've had this issue. And therefore, I am very pleased and proud to be before you, supporting and requesting your approval of this use. Again, we will be happy to answer any additional questions, but we believe we've satisfied all of your conditions of approval for our conditional use. I think that most of the comments we've heard opposed to it are based on the existing permitted use, not based on our request for a conditional use. So, and in the areas where they were concerned about those being increased, we have shown with expert testimony that that's not going to impact it. So again, thank you very much. I promised the chair I would be brief, and we're here again if you have anything further.
All right, just one final note. Our recommendation in meeting to vote on this and discuss it is June 3rd. One thing we need prior to that is the information on the septic system and that. So we probably need that about 10 to 12 days in advance so the members can get it, and then we'd be prepared. Does that meet with the schedule to come in on June 3rd? Yes. You don't really have anything else. I mean, you can get that done by then and then we'll proceed. Okay.
We will get that to you, and we will have a representative at that meeting if there are any additional questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll close the meeting and it will be reconvened on June 3rd at 5:30 p.m., not 6 o'clock. We don't take testimony on that day unless the board has something specific for it, but nobody else is allowed to talk, and then we can vote on it, or if something comes up, we can defer it and have to get other information.
Is that in the same location?
Yeah, we'll do it here. Okay, we are adjourned.